Real prices and ideal prices refers to a distinction between actual prices paid for products, services, assets and labor, and computed prices which are not actually charged or paid in market trade, although they may facilitate trade. The differences between actual prices paid and information about possible, potential or likely prices or average price levels. This distinction should not be confused with the difference between nominal prices and real prices. Ideal prices, expressed in money units, can be estimated, theorized, or imputed for accounting, trading, marketing or calculation purposes. For example, using the law of averages, even if such prices therefore may not directly correspond to transactions involving actually traded products, assets or services, they can nevertheless provide price signals which influence economic behavior. For example, if statisticians publish aggregated price estimates about the economy as a whole, market actors are likely to respond to this price information, even if it is far from exact, based on a very large number of assumptions, and later revised. The release of new GDP data, for instance, often has an immediate effect on stock market activity, insofar as it is interpreted as an indicator of whether and how fast the market, and consequently the incomes generated by it, is growing or declining. Ideal prices are typically prices that would apply in trade, if certain assumed conditions apply. The distinction is currently best known in the profession of auditing. It also has enormous significance for economic theory, and more specifically for econometric measurement and price theory. The main reason is that price data is very often the basis for making economic and policy decisions. Karl Marx, a distinction between real prices and ideal prices, was introduced in Marx's Grundrisse notebooks. In a contribution to the critique of political economy, Marx already criticizes James Stewart and John Gray because they fudged the distinction between actual prices and ideal prices. In Chapter 3 of the first volume of Das Kapital, Marx states, "Every trader knows that he is far from having turned his goods into money when he has expressed the value in a price or in imaginary money, and that it does not require the least bit of real gold to estimate in that metal millions of pounds worth of goods. When, therefore, money serves as a measure of value, it is employed only as imaginary or ideal money." This circumstance has given rise to the wildest theories. But, although the money that performs the functions of a measure of value is only ideal money, price depends entirely upon the actual substance that is money. The possibility of quantitative incongruity between price and magnitude of value, or the deviation of the former from the latter, is inherent in the price form itself. This is no defect, but, on the contrary, admirably adapts the price form to a mode of production whose inherent laws impose themselves only as the mean of apparently lawless irregularities that compensate one another. The price form, however, is not only compatible with the possibility of a quantitative incongruity between magnitude of value and price, i.e., between the former and its expression in money, but it may also conceal a qualitative inconsistency, so much so that, although money is nothing but the value form of commodities, price ceases altogether to express value. The activity of pricing goods, services and assets, facilitating transactions, communicating prices and keeping track of them, in fact, consumes a very large amount of human labor time, irrespective of whether it happens to occur in a centralized or decentralized way. Millions of workers are professionally specialized in such activities, whether as clerks, tellers, buyers, retail assistants, accountants, financial advisors, bank workers, or economists, etc. If that work is not done, price information would not be available, with the result that the trading process would become difficult or impossible to operate. Whether or not this is considered bureaucratic, it therefore remains an essential administrative service. People cannot choose between prices if they don't even know what those prices are, and, normally, they cannot just make up any kind of price they like because costing, budgets and incomes depend precisely on what price is charged. The creation of price information is a production process. Its output is worth money because it is vital for the purpose of trade, and without it the circulation of goods and services could not occur. Price information can therefore be bought and sold as a commodity as well, but the production process of prices themselves is often hidden from view and hardly noticeable. Therefore, people often take the existence of price information for granted and as obvious, meriting no further inquiry. A mysterious certainty dominates our lives in late capitalist modernity. The price, not of single day, passes without learning, making and taking it. Yet despite prices' widespread presence around us, we do not know much about them. A price may also be attached in the course of another activity, or the pricing procedure may be a closely guarded secret rather than accessible in an open market, because if competitors knew about it, this could adversely affect business income. But if pricing processes are viewed as production processes, it turns out that much more is involved than the observation of a price tag a number might suggest. For most of the history of economics, economic theorists were not primarily concerned with explaining the actual, real price levels. Instead, the theorizing was concerned with theoretical prices. Simon Clark explains, for example, the marginalists were no more concerned with the determination of the actual prices that ruled on the market than were the classical economists. All the innovators emphasized the abstract character of pure economic theory, in which the intervention of chance and uncertainty, of specific historical institutions or political interventions, could all be ignored and their consideration deferred to subordinate empirical and policy studies. Pure theory was not concerned with the determination of actual prices but with the determination in an ideal world of perfect knowledge, perfect foresight, perfect competition, and pure rationality. It is against this ideal world that the real world and proposed reforms in the real world are to be measured. The questions that gave rise to a demand for a pure theory of price were questions about the proper prices of commodities. Jevons, for example, was especially concerned with the problem of scarcity and with the role of prices in allocating resources. The problem he posed was that of determining what prices would achieve the optimal allocation of resources. The solutions that were reached would then serve as the basis of policy prescriptions about the proper role of state intervention in the formation of prices in order to achieve such an allocation. Quote, "It is only relatively recently that economists have tried to create generalizations about the actual pricing procedures used by business enterprises, based on information about what business people actually do." Illustrations of ideal prices. An example would be an equilibrium price calculated by an economist. This is a price which a type of product or asset would theoretically have if supply and demand were balanced. This price does not exist in actual trading processes except in special and rare cases. It is only an ideal or theoretical price level, which at best is only approximated in the real world. In accounting practice, ideal prices are used all the time. For example, when accountants have to value a stock of assets, or a set of transactions across an interval of time, they apply rules and criteria to arrive at a price reflecting the cost or market value of the stock or flow of transactions. In grossing and netting, they apply certain rules of inclusion and exclusion to obtain the desired measure, but the valuation obtained following a standard procedure is in truth only hypothetical, because it represents a price which the assets of flows would have if they were traded or exchanged under assumed conditions, or if they were replaced at a certain point in time. In principle, they need not refer to any real transaction flows at all, being only an imputation. Yet, the ideal price obtained may nevertheless influence a whole lot of transactions based on it, to the extent that it provides information and a measure of how a related market process is thought to be evolving. Ideal prices are often used in price negotiations, bidding, price estimation and insurance. These are calculated prices for things being traded, or the compensation which would be given if certain conditions apply. Business deals can become very complex, and may involve numerous price assumptions. For example, the contract may be that if an average price trend occurs, then a certain amount of money will be paid out. Thus, the actual amount of money that changes hands may be conditional on a variety of price estimates. Actual and potential prices. When goods are produced for sale, they may be priced, but those prices are initially only potential prices. There may not be any certainty about whether they will all fetch exactly the sum of money stated by those prices when they are actually sold, or whether they will be sold at all. In retrospect, the final value of an output, activity or asset may turn out to have been higher or lower than previously anticipated, because for various reasons prices and demand changed in the meantime. Thus, price negotiations, trading circumstances and the time factor may change actual prices realized from the prices originally set. And if price inflation occurs, there is in addition a difference between the nominal prices and the inflation-adjusted price. The price of a stock or a debt security, expressed in a given currency, may be highly variable, and the variable yields may in turn revalue or devalue the prices of related assets. Thus, the price mechanism is often not simply a function of supply and demand for a tradable object, but of a structure of related and coexisting prices, where fluctuations in one group of prices impact on another group of prices, perhaps quite contrary to the wishes of buyers and sellers. In this sense, the concept of a price shock refers to a drastic change in the price of a good which is widely used, and which therefore suddenly changes a whole lot of related prices. The sale price may be modified also by the difference in time between purchase and payment. For example, someone may opt to buy a product on credit, and pay interest in addition to the asking price for the product, and the interest charge may additionally vary during the interval in which the principal is paid off. Or the price changes because of price inflation or because it is renegotiated. If it is not possible to pay for something within the previously expected time interval, that may also change prices. Mike Beggs explains why credit instruments complicate the distinction between actual and ideal prices. The essence of monetary relations is that exchange often is, and has been, mediated by credit relations rather than through the actual circulation of money. This is undeniably true. Credit relationships transform exchange so that payments do not coincide with transactions, and reciprocal relationships may mean that some debts balance without ever needing to be cleared by monetary payment. The effect of credit instruments is that actual payments are removed in space and time from the trade in debt obligations, and indeed the trade in debt can occur without necessarily involving any transactions with real money. In turn, this blurs the distinction between actual money and ideal money, or between real and ideal prices. In developed economies, cash in circulation normally ranges from 6% to 8% of GDP, but the debts of private banks alone are already a multiple of GDP. the valuation criteria in pricing. Consequently, what the real price of a thing is might be a topic of dispute, because it may involve conditions and valuation criteria which some would not accept, because they apply different valuation criteria. Different conditions have a different purpose. For example, an asset or product may be valued by accountants and statisticians at its historic cost, its book value, its accounting value, its current market value, its nominal value, its accrual value, its discounted sale, bundle or Groupon value, its value for legal purposes, its gross or net value, its current replacement value, its current trading value, its warehouse or shop value when stored, its value given its current location, its FOB value, its value before or after transport costs, its transfer pricing value, its value in terms of its future earnings potential, its insurance value, its value for tax purposes, its pre-tax or post-tax value, its depreciated value, its inflation-adjusted value, its value given a risk of loss of value, its value if it is traded at a specific time, its value in a foreign currency, its value at purchasing power parity, its final value, its scrap value, etc. An interest rate can be considered to be the price of borrowing money for a period of time. A price can be computed for each of these valuations, depending on one's purpose. Often the purpose is assumed to be self-evident, being related to a specific transaction, and thus what the price of something is taken as obvious. But an object or activity can in reality be priced in many different ways, depending on what valuation is relevant, or what price is negotiated. In modern banking, there are literally hundreds of additional conventions used to value assets under a variety of conditions. A price is exact. In an interview, the late Benoit Mandelbrot cited Louis Bachelier's thesis that prices have only one parameter defining the variability. They can only go up or down, and that, then, seems to provide a robust logical foundation for the mathematical modeling of price movements. But this sidesteps the qualitative problem that many different prices can be calculated for the same good, for all kinds of different purposes, using different valuation assumptions or transaction conditions. Bachelier's idea already assumes that we have a standard way to measure prices. Given that standard, one can then perform all kinds of mathematical operations on price distributions. Yet tradable objects can also be combined and repackaged in numerous different ways, in which case the reference price may not simply go up or down, but instead refers to a different kind of deal. This issue is well known to official statisticians and economic historians, because they face the problem that the very objects whose price movements they aim to track change qualitatively across time, which may necessitate adjustments of the classification systems used to provide standard measures. A good example of that is the regimen of the Consumer Price Index, which is periodically revised. But in times of rapid social change, the problem of devising a standard measure may be much more pervasive. FASB and the epistemology of prices. The Financial Accounting Standards Board makes it very explicit that accounting measures for price information may not be completely exact or fully accurate, and that they may not be completely verifiable or absolutely authoritative. They may only be an approximation or estimate of a state of affairs. A price aggregate may be made up from a very large number of transactions and prices, which cannot all be individually checked, and the monetary value of which may involve a certain amount of interpretation. For example, a price may be set, but we may not know for sure whether a good or asset actually traded at this price, or how far exactly the actual price paid diverged from the ordinary set price. However, the board argues that, within certain acceptable limits of error, this is not a problem, so long as we bear in mind the practical purpose of the measures. In summary, verifiability means no more than that several measures are likely to obtain the same measure. It is primarily a means of attempting to cope with measurement problems stemming from the uncertainty that surrounds accounting measures and is more successful in coping with some measurement problems than others. Verification of accounting information does not guarantee that the information has a high degree of representational faithfulness, and a measure with a high degree of verifiability is not necessarily relevant to the decision for which it is intended to be useful. The economic calculation problem and prices. In the classic socialist calculation debate, economic calculation was a problem for centrally planned economies. Necessarily, the central planners had to engage in price accounting and had to use price information, but the volume and complexity of transactions was so great that genuine central planning of the economy was often not really feasible in practice. Often the state authority could only enforce the conditions of access to resources with the aid of extensive policing. An additional problem was that much of the price information was actually false or inaccurate, because economic actors had no interest in providing truthful information, because the nominal price of goods did not reflect their value, or because goods changed hands informally in ways which could not be formally recorded and known. The effect was that the computed accounting information was often a mixture of fact and fiction. Price discovery and information asymmetry. Commenting on the information problems associated with prices, Randall S. Krosner, a governor of the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, theorizes, when a product's track record is not well established, there should be a strong market demand for information in order to facilitate price discovery. Price discovery is the process by which buyers and sellers' preferences, as well as any other available market information, result in the discovery of a price that will balance supply and demand, and provide signals to market participants about how most efficiently to allocate resources. This market-determined price will, of course, be subject to change as new information becomes available, as preferences evolve, as expectations are revised, and as costs of production change. In order for this process to work most effectively, market participants must utilize information relevant to value that product. Of course, searching out and using relevant sources of information, as well as determining what information is relevant, has its own costs. To underscore the last point, with new instruments, it may not even be clear exactly what information is needed for price discovery. That is, some market participants may not know what they do not know, and they may therefore terminate the information gathering stage prematurely, unwittingly bearing the risks and costs of incomplete information. In addition to the discrepancies between real prices and ideal prices, it may in fact be impossible at any one time to know what the correct price of something ought to be, even although it is being traded anyway. For an actual price, the correct price level is only an ideal price, namely a price at which supply and demand would tend towards balance. But because of inadequate information, that price may never be reached. Supply and demand may only haphazardly adjust to each other using inadequate information. Just before the financial crisis of 2007-08, the Wall Street Journal reported that today, way less than half of all securities trade on exchanges with readily available price information, according to Goldman Sachs Group Inc. Analyst Daniel Harris. More and more securities are priced by dealers who don't publish quotes. As a result, money managers can no longer gauge with certainty the value of some assets in mutual funds, hedge funds and other investment vehicles. The reassurance of a self-balancing market does not matter much when people are making money, but when they do not, they become very concerned with market imbalances. When the information needed to calculate prices is inadequate for any reason, it becomes susceptible to swindles, confidence tricks and fraud which may be difficult to detect or combat. Insofar as the trading parties have to make assumptions in interpreting price information where any misunderstanding is their own responsibility, the risks and risk-bearers may not be fully specifiable. In this context, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states, when there is a risk, there must be something that is unknown or that has an unknown outcome. Therefore, knowledge about risk is knowledge about lack of knowledge. This combination of knowledge and lack thereof contributes to making issues of risk complicated from an epistemological point of view. Quote, this problem is compounded if various extrapolated ideal prices used to guide economic actors rely on observed trends in real prices which fluctuate a great deal in ways that are difficult to predict, and if the predictions made themselves influence price levels. It plays an important role in the theory of information asymmetry to which Joseph Stiglitz has made important contributions. Price information is likely to be reliable if market actors have a self-interest in providing true information. If it is technically possible to obtain true and accurate information, and if there are comprehensive legal sanctions for false price information. But additionally, any market cannot function unless participants show trust and cooperation, and are motivated to do so.